Hey everybody, welcome to this tutorial special episode featuring the Remesher workflow in Blender. And this is going to be a very exciting episode because essentially this is the most important workflow that I can at the moment think about to make a tutorial about. And some of you may already have watched my Revolver tutorial, which I released 2 years ago, or maybe a bit longer already, where I already used Remesher for the first time, and it's still as recent as it is now. But in the meantime, some time has passed, and you can see here at the moment I'm working on different weapons for the marketplaces. So this is at the moment on top of my priority list, and also is the reason why I haven't actually released anything new in regards to tutorials. But in this episode we're gonna have an in-depth look at everything related to the Remesher workflow, so that you will also get started with this if you want to give it a try. And I can highly encourage you. This is the best workflow currently around for creating high poly models. In my previous tutorials, the one that were 3D Max based, and when I simply didn't know about Remesher in Blender yet, I had to rely on the sub-D workflow, which is of course also an option, but it will always complicate your life when it comes to pinching and overlapping of geometry, some shading issues that are caused by this. So it requires you to be 100% focused on making sure that the high poly is as good as it can be. And here with Remesher, we don't have this anymore. We simply add Remesher and it's done. So in that sense, it's almost the closest thing that we have at the moment to a make art button. This is essentially what it feels, because when you have one element in place and you have the modifier stack on top of it, which consists, by the way, out of subdivision, same as with the sub-D workflow, we still need our subdivision, but then we also add Remesher and the smooth corrective. And these three modifiers we can then simply copy and paste from one object to another, and we get our high poly model in the most beautiful shape and form as it could possibly be for a great bake of your normal map and the other maps that come with it. So in short, this is why I'm excited today to talk to you about this workflow. And speaking of which, it's not necessarily a new workflow. This whole principle of the remeshing is also something that can be done inside of Zbrush. So maybe you already came across some people talking about the Zbrush workflow for hard surface models, and it is essentially the same workflow. I can say that with certainty because my friend, who also worked at Digital Extremes at the same time when I did, he and me, we were both working on our weapons outside of the job in our free time. And then we started to compare because he was using ZBrush for it. And I just made the discovery for me personally that, there's this remeshing. Because first I thought I'm going to use the sculpting mode and see if I can somehow replicate what I saw my friend doing in ZBrush with the Dynamesh and the smoothing. And then it occurred to me that this actually exists as a modifier. So that way we were able to determine that it is one-to-one the same as if you would do it in ZBrush. We did some direct comparisons where he sent me the mesh that he dynameshed and that he polished inside of ZBrush, and I compared it against the remeshing results here inside of Blender, and that's how we could see it's the same principle, it's exactly the same type of look of the mesh. So now we have the luxury of having this as a modifier where we can toggle it on and off, and it's simply amazing. Okay, I think enough with all the praises for it. Let's actually now take a look at what's under the hood. And later, by the way, I'm gonna even show you like a small issue that this workflow still has, but it's certainly not a big deal, and it's also no reason not to use it. But I'm gonna show you in a moment. I just want to show you here the importance of these crease edges, the one here shown with this pink or magenta color. This is how we tell Blender, look, we want our hard edges to be here, and then in combination with the subdivision modifier, which we tell to respect the crease edges, we make sure that we have all the tessellation we need for it to be perfectly nice and round. So now we're gonna take a look here at this silencer, and I just want to go through it with you step by step. So step one, you have your base geometry in place, and that must be a closed mesh. It cannot have any open faces, but you can use a mirror modifier too if you want. Step two, we're gonna add our crease information to tell Blender these are our hard edges, and then we're gonna add the subdivision modifier and tell it to respect the crease. Step three, we're gonna add our remesher modifier. So that will, like the name suggests, remesh everything based on these voxels. And that way we have a complete new mesh, modifier based, that went through everything and essentially tessellates it into small pieces. Now, step four, we have to add our corrective smooth modifier, and we can play a little bit around with those settings, but usually I like to keep it at around 0.1 to 0.5 factor. And within that, we have the ability to determine the look of our mesh, how hard-edged, how soft it should look, have a bit of flexibility there. Okay guys, so far we were having a look at elements that already have the modifiers in place. So that begs the question, how do we actually start this all from scratch? And we're gonna take a look at this in just a moment, but I just want to once again mention the copy and paste ability of this workflow. For the most parts, we have one element, we then select the next element, and as long as it has the crease edges in place, we can simply make it a copy and paste process. That makes it incredibly fast to work with and saves us also a lot of time. But now let's create something from scratch here, and let's see what we have to consider when we do that. So let's start by bringing in a new element here to our scene. And as we can see, it's gigantic in contrast to our current object that we're working on, which is the gun, especially when you zoom in on the gun and you then see how dense these voxels are. What that means is, if we would just try to copy and paste that over here to that cylinder, it would 100% crash your Blender because it would try to tessellate all of it. And because we can't do that, we have to scale it down to an appropriate size. So we have to be aware of our units, and we have to also make sure that things are scaled down to a manageable size. So whenever we did that, we can then make a reset on the scaling properties, Control A, and apply rotation and scale. That way we're making sure that Blender now understands that this is the actual size we want and no more this 2 meter diameter thing. So now that we have that, we can start by selecting our sharp edges, adding the crease information here to the sides, and then we add our subdivision surface modifier, put that up so that it's nice and round. And as you can see, by default, it already says use creases. That's what we need. So next, we make our Remesher modifier here on top. And it will look like a box because the voxel size is way too large. We need to bring that down. So I'm gonna put it here to 0.02, which is almost what I have for the gun parts. I think I have 0.01 for the most parts, but just to demonstrate it. And 0.02 is perfectly okay for a lot of cases too, because we want it to be smooth. It doesn't always have to be super sharp. But now that we have this, we can then add the corrective smooth. And of course, the smoothing also helps us to determine how soft we want it to be, as the name suggests. So it looks at the underlying remesh and then it smoothes on top of it. And in order to give it a nice strong effect, we want to put it to 150 repeat. This basically multiplies the whole smoothing, and now we can see we have a nice density here on it. So this is essentially how to make that modifier stack from scratch. And if we were to add yet another element here to the scene, same thing applies as before. We want to make sure that we apply the rotation and scale to it before we then copy and paste it over here to the new element. So let's do the copy modifiers. And now it looks like a sphere because I didn't put the crease to it yet. So we go in edit mode, select our edges, crease it, and then back to object mode. It loads a second, and then we have our remeshed box in front of us. So this is how to do the whole stack from scratch, and from there on it's then a copy and paste matter. So what we were just doing here with the scaling and resetting the scale information can also work the other way around. Let's say we have this screw element here. You can see that the one on the left have double the remesh information than the one on the right. But the right one already has 0.01 as a voxel size, so we cannot get it sharper unless we scale it up and then apply rotation and scale. So now it works the other way around. We scale it up, we set the X form, and then we scale it back down with the new remesh information. And that way we get it nice and dense, and in some cases this makes sense so that we have simply more detail there in place. So I just thought I show you how fast we can actually work once we have our object done as far as the modeling is concerned, and if we have our crease information in place. So I stripped off all the modifiers aside from this one screw, and from there on I simply copy and paste it now over to the other elements. And yes, I'm cheating a little bit because I was cutting out the parts where it's loading, but nevertheless it takes maybe a few seconds to load, unnecessary for this video, but still it's such a straightforward workflow, and I just wanted to show you how fast this can actually be. So we go through these pieces one by one, copy and paste, and then we still have the flexibility if we want to change like individual elements if we feel maybe the density should be a bit higher. But in most cases I do like this. I have the same properties for everything, which makes it then also so straightforward. So there we go. This is our magnifier here, perfectly done. And now let's take a look here, for example, at this element. I go over to remesh and I put the voxel size to 0.02. And that way I get a bit more smoothing here on this element, which might be better suited for it or not. But once again, it simply shows how practical that is. Same here for this part. 0.02 will just make it a bit more round, which might not always be perfectly suitable like here in that case, but still we have this flexibility to do that. So we're almost at the end now of the tutorial. I think I covered every aspect that I could think of for this workflow, but let me also say something that might still need a bit of improvement. I'm not sure if they can do anything about it, but in some cases you zoom in on these curved areas and you see that the mesh flow is not actually as perfect as we would like it to be, and that can result in a little bit this bumpy type of look, which we then however can try to counter by, for example, increasing our remesh resolution and then going back to the corrective smooth and put a higher factor in there. So far it's not been anything to be concerned about. I have not seen any normal map bake that resulted in like a jagged look where it would look weird. It always comes out perfect for the common sizes of normal map baking, like 4K to 2K. So that brings us to the end of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe and share the link with other people that might be interested in it. If you want to learn more, you're always welcome to join us at the ChamferZone Discord community, where we have a really nice group of people going that are extremely helpful, beginners and pros alike. And another word that I wanted to say about my older tutorials. These are still as valid as always when it comes to the actual modeling techniques. The only difference is that nowadays I would recommend you to utilize the Remesher for anything high poly related. And speaking of which, you can check out my latest Revolver tutorial that got you covered with Remesher 100%. See ya!